Like other photography trends, the preferred focal length can come and go. In the last decade, with the popularity of smartphones, the wide angle look has become the standard. Around 24 millimeters has become everyone's default. And we consume so much genuine content from social media, but also our friends taken at that 24 millimeter focal length, that it has taken on a new meaning. This wide angle now means sincerity. It means like friendship. And as a result, I've also changed my daily lens. What used to be a 24-70, where 24 was the widest I could possibly go, now I shoot with a 16-35 by default. This is my normal walking around setup, a Sony Alpha 1 with the Sony 16-35 F2.8 GM lens. But I'm lucky because in the Sony system I have not one, but 3 16-35s I can choose from. This is the original 16-35 F4 ZA lens, and this is the new 16-35 power zoom lens. Check out this incredible attention to detail in the design. Here we have a clickable aperture ring. Now you can get your aperture set without ever looking at a camera screen. Oh, and if you're shooting video, you can turn that click off. And now that aperture ring moves nice and smooth, so you can adjust the aperture on the fly. This also has a power zoom feature. You can zoom in a conventional but electronic way by using the zoom ring, or you can push the zoom lever up and down. Especially with a high megapixel camera like this A1, I can crop down to 50 millimeters or even 70 millimeters pretty comfortably. That's part of why this is such a good all-around lens. Note that G there. That means this is a high quality lens, but it's not part of their professional G Master GM lineup. I'm Tony Northrup, a professional photographer, author, and YouTuber, and I'm going to test all 3 of these Sony 16-35 lenses to help you decide which one you should get. Now let's test video autofocus using the Sony a7S III. I'm going to put all lenses at 35 millimeters and f4. This is going to be really meaningful to anybody doing run and gun style shooting where you might need to track moving subjects, but especially thinking of YouTubers who do sort of unboxing videos where things suddenly pop at the camera and you need immediate focus. I counted hundreds of frames and found they each averaged about 380 milliseconds to switch focus between the 2 subjects, so it's basically a tie. This is my gimbal. It's a device that stabilizes a video camera so that you can walk and get pretty steady shots. It's a DJI RS2. Now, it's a pretty powerful gimbal. It's designed for full frame cameras and heavy lenses, and I frequently use it with the 16-35 f2.8. But one of the challenges I have with that and other zoom lenses is that when I adjust the zoom lens, they become unbalanced. Let's attach this new power zoom lens to it. You can see now it's front heavy, so it's tilting forward. And before I turn it on, I want to get it as close to balanced as possible. And we have a USB cable that provides some control over the camera from the gimbal itself. So there, it's pretty well balanced and it's ready to turn on, but I have to do that process every time I attach a different camera or lens. The problem with my 16-35 is that when I zoom it, you can see it changes lengths and it also changes the center of gravity. Thus, I sort of adjust the gimbal for the mid setting, and this gimbal is strong enough that I can zoom in or out and I don't need to make adjustments to it. But it is preferable to have an internally zooming lens. That means I could use a lighter weight gimbal and my arm wouldn't get tired so fast. And now let's test the Dolly zoom, a shot made famous in Alfred Hitchcock's Vertigo, but now used so regularly to show somebody sort of losing their mind or changing character. What happens with a Dolly zoom, you start in close and then pull back while zooming in. The subject size stays the same, but the facial proportions change as you zoom, and the background changes perspective too. You can do it both ways, and it's a unique trait of the power zoom lens here to be able to do that smoothly. The other lenses, you have to manually turn it, and that's never going to be quite smooth. Okay, I need more practice as a camera operator to get these shots nice and smooth, but I like having the option and the ability to introduce this into our more dramatic works. Now you can remotely control the power zoom in several different ways. The dial here on the lens, the zoom and telephoto switch, or I could control it from the gimbal. But I find the only way that's really smooth is the switch on the side of the lens. Now I'm going to test each of the lenses for hand holdability, and I'm going to be following the rule of doubles. Be sure to watch that video if you aren't already familiar with that. This lens, the original Zeiss 16-35 f4, has image stabilization. Now my camera body, the Sony Alpha 1, has sensor stabilization, just like pretty much all the Sony camera bodies do. but I'm wondering if the optical stabilization built into this lens will improve the performance in low light enough that I might be able to shoot at longer shutter speeds, thus producing cleaner images. It's only one way to find out.
The G Master lens is heavy and sharp, meaning handheld stabilization is tough. It got only 40% of shots sharp 1 stop below the reciprocal rule and only 10% sharp at 3 stops below. The Zeiss lens is stabilized, but somehow it performed the worst of the 3 lenses. The new G Power Zoom lens actually won. It got about 10% of shots sharp even 4 stops below the reciprocal rule, maybe because it's so light.
Now for the test of maximum magnification. That's not how close something gets, that's how big the subject can be compared to the actual sensor size. We basically want to extract as much detail as possible from smaller subjects. For each of the lenses, I'm switching them to manual focus. I'm then going to focus as close as possible and then push in until I see it gets sharp. I'll try this at different focal lengths to make sure I achieve the focal length that gets the maximum magnification, because it's not always a telephoto end.
This is the F2.8 GM lens. This is the F4 Zeiss lens, and this is the new lens. You can see it gets significantly closer to small subjects, winning our maximum magnification competition.
Now we need to test the bokeh, which is the quality of the autofocus parts of the picture. Specifically, I'm going to create some bokeh balls using this sign, but at 16 millimeters and f4, it's kind of hard to see any sort of bokeh because it's wide angle and fairly small aperture opening. So I'm going to use a very small subject to really achieve high magnification and thus maximize the amount of bokeh that we get.
The Zeiss F4 lens has good bokeh, but if you look closely, you can see a little bit of soap bubble texture. The new G Power Zoom lens has a little bit better bokeh. It's a little bit smoother. The F2.8 GM lens has more bokeh because of the bigger aperture, so the bokeh balls are bigger and more attractive. The quality of the bokeh is also very smooth, so the GM lens wins this contest.
This is my sharpness testing setup. I have a Sony a7R4, that's a 60 megapixel full frame camera configured in pixel shift mode for 16 shots with a delayed shutter. So it's going to create 240 megapixel pictures where each pixel has full color information, full red, green, blue. So this is pretty much the most detailed image you can possibly make in 2022. And we're going to shoot each of the lenses at f4, common aperture, and then compare them to see which is sharpest. I've set up an array of flat subjects here right along the focal plane because frequently with these super wide angle lenses, the focal plane can bend a little bit, like it might not be completely flat. So I want to see if it is shifting in or out, which would mean a lot to, say, real estate or architectural photographers who are shooting completely flat subjects. Let's look at the results.
Let's compare the old Zeiss F4 lens to the new Power Zoom G lens on the right. You can see we exceed the resolution of the print, and we can see the miniature elements that the printer uses to create each color. So both are quite sharp, but you can see the old Zeiss lens is very smeary, whereas the new Power Zoom lens is incredibly crisp. Peeking into the extreme corners, the difference is even greater. The Power Zoom wins by a huge margin. But how does it compare to the F2.8 GM? We get incredible detail from both shooting at f4, but I can't believe it, but the Power Zoom lens is actually a little sharper than the G Master lens. Look at the color fringing here and the incredible detail from the Power Zoom lens. In the extreme corners, the Power Zoom lens is significantly sharper. This might be because of a not quite perfectly flat focal plane from the old GM lens.
While I'm here, I'm going to test the low light performance of each lens. It's so dark I have to light my face up to see how the different f-stops perform. Two of these lenses are f4, which means they gather half the light of the f2.8 lens. At f4, this camera is at ISO 25,600 to get a photo at 1/60th of a second. At f2.8, the more expensive GM lens is going to be at ISO 12,800, gathering twice as much light, so half the same ISO. This is going to be really important information to anybody who shoots low light events such as wedding receptions, because the 16 to 35 is really a staple of that environment, and the ability to gather an extra stop of light could really improve the quality of your pictures by reducing the noise. Let's look at the results.
Now let's zoom way in to see the differences between f2.8 and f4. You can see the grain on the f4 lens is just way bigger and chunkier. There's simply way less detail. The f2.8 lens, gathering twice as much light, has of course much more detail. The difference you see here is almost the difference between full frame and APS-C. In other words, by using an f4 lens on your full frame camera instead of an f2.8 lens, you're basically taking a step down in sensor size. And look how drastic the difference is closer to the corners. The f2.8 lens gathering so much more light is really showing us much more picture. You'll be spending almost twice as much on the f2.8 lens, but you get twice as much light. And that can mean sellable professional pictures in low light situations that the f4 lens just can't reproduce.
Let me quickly demonstrate the importance of that declickable aperture using this cool new gadget that I found. This is with the clicks on. You can see the whole camera shakes. This is with the clicks off. Want to see our upcoming video about this cool gadget? Just subscribe to the channel. So which of these three lenses should you get? The answer is actually pretty straightforward. If you're doing low light work, the f2.8 aperture on this is going to make a huge difference because it gathers twice as much light as the other lenses. That's especially important for subjects like astrophotography. So you landscape photographers, while you don't necessarily need to be shooting wide open at f2.8 all the time, could be really useful for those times when the lights get dark and you want to avoid star trails. However, for most people, I think the new f4 power zoom lens is going to be the right choice, especially anyone shooting video. The power zoom and the declickable aperture ring make it extremely versatile. You can create really cool effects, and you might not need to use them every day, but you only really need them one time over the lifetime of the lens to justify getting this option instead. It's really small and lightweight, and it doesn't telescope when it zooms, so it's perfect for using on a gimbal. This power zoom lens is an incredible win for video shooters, and it's something that Canon and Nikon don't offer at all. This lens alone might be enough to steer you towards the Sony infrastructure if you're shooting video. Now, that leaves the Sony 16-35 F4 ZA lens. And while this has been a good lens, it's now looking pretty old. And the fact is, the new price is more than the new power zoom lens, and so I would never recommend that somebody buy this new. However, used, the prices are about half the price of this. You can pick one up for $600 to $800. So if that's your budget, this is still a good lens to get. But you don't get those cool features like power zoom. In the comments down below, I'd like to hear your thoughts. What do you want to see us review next? And of course, subscribe to see more gear reviews, photography tutorials, and of course, breaking news. Bye.